This video will be a comprehensive introduction and operator instructions of the DYN4 AC Servo System. To help us guide through this procedure, we've set up an axis using the 880 DST 750W motor and a DYN4 H01 servo drive. We start with an explanation of the product selection and servo drive model number, which leads into the servo motor and cable pair selections. Once the system parts are configured, we go over the basic features of the servo drive, then the wiring. After everything is wired, the drive is connected to the PC configuration program and all the parameters and settings are explained. Then all the connectors, pins, and I/O signals are reviewed in detail. Finally, we go over some common operation examples and the DYN4 AC Servo System is ready for commissioning. DMM manufactures two servo drive series, the DYN2 and DYN4. The main difference is that the DYN2 servo drive is 24 to 75 volts DC input, and the DYN4 servo drive is 110 to 240 volts AC input. The DYN4 servo drive also supports bigger motor sizes and has more built-in features such as emulated encoder output, more I/O points, and a dedicated regenerative resistor circuit. The DYN4 servo drive model number has three main selections. The first is the rated output, which is selected according to the motor used. The L01 model is used for 50W to 400W motors, the H01 model is used for 750W and 1kW motors, and the T01 servo drive is used for 1.3 and 1.8kW motors. The command interface is also split between three models. The Type A is general purpose pulse analog and RS-232 interface. B-type includes RS-485 Modbus RTU interface, and C-type includes CAN interface. Both B and C-type servo drives also include RS-232 and pulse analog. The last two digits of the model number indicates non-standard options such as multi-turn encoder option and custom firmware options. The motor model should be selected according to the required torque, inertia, and speed. The servo drive and cable should be paired with the selected motor. For example, as in our demo system, the 880 DST 750W motor should be paired with the DYN4 H01 servo drive. This motor has an 80mm frame size and 19mm diameter shaft. This motor uses the encoder and motor power cables with HL configuration. All motors can be ordered with an integrated holding brake option. Refer to the servo drive motor manual for detailed specifications on each motor. The encoder and motor power cable selection depends on the motor size used. For 50W to 750W motors, the HL configuration cables are used. For 1kW to 1.8kW size motors, the HH configuration cables are used. All standard cables are available in 3, 5, 10, and 15 meter length options with custom length options available. The encoder cables are pre-assembled and can be connected directly into the drive and motor. The motor power cable is connected to the motor with the pre-assembled connector. The servo drive side is secured with screw terminal blocks. To connect the DYN4 servo drive into the PC, the user will also need one USB tuning cable. This tuning cable is only used for initial testing and servo drive configuration and is not needed during actual operation with the host controller. All standard servo drive, motors, and cables are stocked. Brake motors are also stocked with limited quantities. Please consult our website for more details on purchasing, inventory, and lead time details. On the front of the servo drive are all the interface connections. JP2 is the PC connection to connect the USB tuning cable. This is also the connector for the RS-485 Modbus and CAN interface and RS-232 interface. JP3 is the encoder feedback connector to connect the encoder cable from the motor. JP4 is the main I/O connector. JP5 is the emulated incremental encoder output connector. T2 is the servo motor power output to connect the servo motor power cable. T3 is the regenerative resistor output. T4 is the main AC power input. On the bottom left are two M4 sized earth grounding screws. Typically, one screw is connected to the motor power cable earth ground, and the other screw is connected to the AC input power earth ground. The DYN4 servo drive should be mounted using two M5 screws secured at the back. The servo drive and mounting dimensions are as shown. All DYN4 L01, H01, and T01 servo drives share the same dimensions. Make sure to leave 60mm in front of the servo drive for cable spacing. The L01 servo drive can be mounted right next to each other. The H01 and T01 servo drive should be spaced at least 10mm besides one another. It's recommended for the control cabinet to have a fan installed to allow airflow for the servo drives. Make sure the servo drive does not accumulate any dust or debris during operation. Liquids must not come in contact with the servo drive at any time. The servo motor connects to the drive using the encoder and motor power cables. The cable connectors are prefabricated and plugs directly from the drive to the motor. The motor power cable has an earth ground terminal which should be attached to the servo drive grounding screw. The DYN4 servo drive is powered using 110 to 240 volts AC input. The same servo drive accepts both 110 and 240 volt voltage levels. Both single and three-phase power is accepted. This is a basic minimum wiring diagram for initial bench testing. If the user is unfamiliar with the servo system, we recommend starting with this circuit. Make sure all drives, motors, and cables are tested before installing onto the machine. As in our demo setup, the main input power is 110 volts AC. The power first goes through a circuit breaker, then a contactor, then is distributed into the servo drive logic and control inputs. The contactor is controlled by an on-off switch and an e-stop button, both powered by a 24 volts power supply. The wiring components can be readily sourced online from suppliers such as Automation Direct or DigiKey. Equivalent parts can also be used as long as it satisfies the specifications. Once the parts are individually tested, the full wiring specification can be installed into the control box. When the servo drive is installed on the final application, follow this diagram for the full specification. The left side shows a sample 3-phase wiring and the right side single-phase wiring. All components can be readily sourced from online suppliers. In our system, we're using the DYN4 H01 servo drive, so we're using a 20 amp circuit breaker and a 10 amp contactor. The noise filters are used to minimize system noise. A line reactor is recommended with using 200 volts or above levels to smooth the power. When wiring the AC input power into the DYN4 servo drive, take note of these precautions. The max rated AC input power into the DYN4 servo drive is 240 volts AC with 10% tolerance. Make sure the voltage between any two AC phases does not exceed 240 volts. Wire each servo drive to the power supply directly. Do not daisy chain the AC power from one servo drive to another. Do not jumper the RST and L1, L2 inputs. Connect each leg to the AC power supply source directly. Keep all AC power wiring length consistent and wait at least 5 minutes before servicing any wires after the servo drive has been powered off. A regenerative resistor can be connected to the servo drive T3 connector. This resistor is only needed for higher load or higher speed applications. Consult the DMM representative to see if this resistor is needed for your application. Typically, this is only needed for motor sizes 750 watt or above. Before powering up the system for the first time, check the following safety precautions. Once the safety precautions are verified, the servo drive can be powered up. Power on the servo drive. Check that the DYN4 servo drive green status light is on, indicating normal operation state. The DYN4 servo drive is enabled by default, so check to make sure the motor position is locked. Visit DMM's website's downloads page to find the DMMDRV software download link and install the software. Connect the USB tuning cable into the PC. Normally, the PC will install the USB tuning cable driver automatically. If not, manually install the cable driver from our website's link. Open up the DMMDRV program. Select Connect to set the communication port. Click Detect COM port to automatically detect the COM port number. Then set the COM port in the program. If there are any errors with the connection, check to make sure the tuning cable is connected properly and that the servo drive is powered on. You can also manually check the COM port number in the PC Device Manager. The tuning cable will show up as USB serial port along with the COM port number on the right. Once the servo drive is connected, the program will indicate Connected Communication Status. Select Servo Setting, then DYN4 Servo Drive. The main parameter setting screen is opened. First, click Read to read out the servo drive parameters. Once read, check to make sure the driver status indicates servo on position to indicate normal operation. To save the parameters into the servo drive, press Save All and confirm. To read the servo drive parameters, press Read. To refresh the on-screen parameters to default, press Refresh Cons. Note pressing the Refresh Cons button doesn't actually save the parameters into the drive. It only changes the parameters on the software screen. This Refresh Cons button is used to check the parameters are saved correctly. For example, after saving the parameter into the servo drive, press the Refresh Cons button to refresh the on-screen parameters. Then press Read to confirm that the saved parameters can be read out from the drive. We will quickly review each servo drive parameter. For detailed specifications and functionality, please refer to the DYN4 Servo Drive Manual. The top left three parameters are the main servo gain settings to control the motor's stiffness and response. Split into main gain, speed gain, and integration gain. The gain parameters are normally adjusted using the auto-tuning module or can be tuned manually. If the user is unsure about the gain settings, set all three gain parameters to 5 for bench testing without any load on the motor. The torque filter constant parameter is used to apply a filter to the current delivery from the drive to the motor. Lower settings applies a heavier filter and higher settings applies a lighter filter. A setting of 127 turns off the filter completely. Normally set this parameter to 100 to apply a little bit of filter. The max acceleration and max speed parameters are used to set the speed and acceleration when the servo drive is in RS-232, RS-485 Modbus, or CAN control modes. These two parameters control the motion profile of the point-to-point command's movement. In speed servo mode, the max acceleration parameter controls the acceleration of speed change. In command modes such as pulse direction or AB quadrature command, these two parameters are not used. The driver ID is used to set the address of the servo drive node when in RS-232, RS-485 Modbus, or CAN modes. The on-position range parameter controls when the servo drive should output the on-position digital output signal. The gear number parameter sets the digital gear ratio for pulse and serial commands. For example, in pulse direction command, the gear number parameter multiplied by 4 is the number of pulses the drive needs to move the motor 1 revolution. The line number parameter sets the incremental encoder output resolution. If the incremental encoder output is not used, the parameter is not applicable. The start from ABS 0 checkbox is checked if the application needs the motor to automatically return to absolute zero when powered up. In the regular single turn system, the servo drive rotates the motor to single turn absolute zero. In the multi-turn system, the servo drive rotates the motor to multi-turn absolute zero. The servo enable active low checkbox is checked if the application needs the servo drive and motor to be disabled when powered up. The DYN4 servo drive can be operated in standard servo modes including position, speed, and torque. The command and communication modes can be RS-232, pulse direction, AB quadrature, analog, Modbus RS-485, or CAN bus. Certain servo modes can only be run with certain command modes. Please refer to this chart for the command and servo mode combination possibilities. From this parameter screen, the motor can be jogged to test for proper movement. Set the motor on a bench and make sure there are no loose objects close to the motor shaft. Set the servo drive into RS-232 input mode and position servo mode and save. Then, select the constant speed radio button and slowly increase the speed slider to rotate the motor at constant speed. The servo drive has a status LED to indicate the operation state and status. In normal operation, the LED was light green. When the drive is alarmed or faulted, it will flash in various combinations to indicate the exact alarm. When the servo drive is alarmed, use the DMMDRV program to read out the drive parameters. The drive status box will indicate the cause of the alarm. The servo drive should be power cycled to reset alarms. Wait at least 30 seconds after the power cycle before powering back up again. This will ensure proper power down and proper power up for the servo drive. The JP4 connector is used to connect the tuning cable to the PC and is also used for serial and CAN communication. Different communication modes uses different pins. The JP3 connector is used to connect the encoder feedback cable to the motor. It is used for this purpose only. The JP5 connector is a dedicated incremental encoder output. The pins on this connector are all used to output the emulated differential incremental encoder signals. There is also an individual open collector Z-phase index output. JP4 is the main control and I/O connector for the servo drive. The DYN4 servo drive has the following standard outputs. Servo ready output is used to indicate when the servo drive is powered and initialized for normal operation. It's normally high and changes to low when the drive is ready to control the motor. The BKO output is a dedicated brake logic output. The output is used to control a relay to the brake power supply. The on position output is used to detect when the servo drive is in position. Recall there was an on position range parameter in the servo drive. This parameter and output is used in combination. When the drive is in position, the output is low. When the drive is off position, the output is high. The alarm output is used to detect when the servo drive alarms. When the drive is normal, the alarm output is high. When the drive is faulted, the alarm output becomes low. The output signal circuitry are as shown. The servo drive has the following inputs. The main position reference pulse input consists of 4 pins that accepts pulse direction and AB quadrature differential format. The differential analog input is for reference speed and torque analog input. The absolute home input is used to return the servo motor to absolute zero position. The servo hold input is used to stop the servo motor movement from incoming commands. The enable input controls servo drive enable/disable. There is also an open digital input pin that can be used for custom applications. The input signal circuitry are as shown. Now that all the servo drive functions are covered, we will review 2 common operation examples. The most common is position servo mode and pulse command input. For example, the controller requirements are 12,000 pulses per revolution, an on position window of 0.5 degrees, the enable input, alarm, and on position outputs are needed. According to this requirement, the servo drive needs to be set into position servo mode, pulse direction command input mode, gear number to 4000, and on position range 23. As shown are the required parameter settings and sample wiring reference. Our second example is speed servo mode under analog command. For example, the controller requires 8,000 pulses per revolution encoder feedback and 3000 RPM speed reference at 10 volts analog reference input. The enable input and alarm output is needed. Accordingly, the servo drive's line number parameter needs to be set to 2000, gear number set to 3000, and into speed servo mode and analog command input mode. as shown on the required parameter settings and sample wiring reference. When installing the DYN4 AC Servo System, this outline should be followed closely to ensure safe and reliable operation. First, when unpacking, all components' part numbers should be checked. Make sure everything matches the order and all drives, motors, and cables part numbers match up. Then, review the user manuals to fully understand the specifications of each component. Wire and bench test all components. At this point, the motor should not be mounted onto the machine. Once the user is familiar with all components, the motor can be mounted on the machine and auto-tuning or manual tuning should commence to set the servo drive gain. Once the servo drive parameters are completely set, the servo drive can be mounted in the control cabinet, then wired to the host controller. Once the setup is complete, test and monitor the system closely to ensure all components are operating within specification. This concludes our DYN4 Servo System full setup instructions. For more information, please visit our website or contact a DMM representative.